Is that a cue?
Okay, we're live now.
All right, cool. Just to have a quick chat. Golf, are you guys here?
Yes, we're here.
Are you guys here?
We're here.
All right, cool. It's great to know everyone's ready. Right. Just a quick reminder again. Please indicate your PI preference before you guys start your speech, and please respect the established gender pronouns by each speaker. If you're unable to do so, please try to be neutral by addressing the speaker role, i.e., Prime Minister and Leader of Opposition. With the motion as such, I would like to invite the Prime Minister.
Hello, am I audible?
You're loud and clear.
All right, just give me a few seconds to set up my timer, yeah?
Ready when you are.
I'll start my debate in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon. In today's debate, I'll firstly be introducing some problems that need to be addressed in today's debate. Secondly, I'll be giving you our burden of proof, and then we'll be characterizing and defining things in this debate, and then I'll move on to my two main arguments. So, firstly, what exactly are some problems that need to be addressed in today's debate? Authoritarian countries deny basic human rights to their citizens and deny freedom of speech. They use underhanded tactics to try and limit their their oppositions, such as jailing restrictions of movement and restriction of speech. So what exactly is an authoritarian country? Authoritarian countries restrict freedom of speech and political campaigning. They restrict opposition movement. Example would be countries like Russia. So what are we going to prove today? We're going to prove two things. Firstly, we are going to prove that an opposition leader with a strong background in politics and governance is able to hold more leverage and can sustain more change in an authoritarian country. And secondly, we are going to prove to you that you do not have exclusive representation benefits just because you are from a working class. So with that, I'd like to move on to my two arguments. So opposition parties on both sides of the House are going to have the same goal. This goal is most likely to increase government transparency, decrease corruption, increase freedoms such as freedom of speech. Why this is important is that it's an exclusive benefit from side opposition would not come to play as the representation that op can bring would not matter. The exclusive benefit we bring is that leaders from strong backgrounds are more likely going to be effective in leading the party. So my first argument is why opposition leaders from strong backgrounds are going to gain more political leverage. Leaders from political backgrounds are able to gain more political power and are better at lobbying change. This is likely because they are more educated, meaning that they have more knowledge of politics. Lobbying change is important as this means that this opposition's policies are most likely going to be enacted. This allows for the opposition to create more change. The knowledge of laws and how political movements work, which is most likely one brought by a person with high political background, makes it easier for them to achieve change. When the opposition leader has a political background, they're most likely going to evade authoritarian countries from silencing you. This is because you know loopholes in the law, you know what to evade, and you know how they try to catch you. This is not something that's present when a working class member is chosen as an opposition leader, because they're usually it's usually easier to silence them as they do not have the political knowledge of loopholes to avoid this and how this generally happens. This leads to an opposition which is easily controlled by the government party and cannot necessarily lobby any big change because they don't they can lobby change because they are more likely susceptible to the government party. And if a working class opposition leader was chosen, and they had policies which the government didn't like or wanted to silence, they would simply just take them out or take them out and replace them with another one. I mean, with another leader, by things like assassinating them or imprisoning them, etc., which is something people from working classes, leaders from working classes don't know how to avoid, as they have no prior knowledge or education on politics in itself, and they have no prior knowledge to how this authoritarian government silences people. So my second argument is why are they likely to share the same value? Why is the opposition likely to share the same values? What are the problems most prevalent in authoritarian governments? Lack of freedom of speech and lack of political campaigning. This means that problems that are most prevalent in authoritarian countries go beyond class barriers. Poor and rich people can relate to the lack of human rights and democracy, along with crippling corruption that the country faces. This means that the working class people are still able to relate to the opposition in spite of the fact that they're being led by someone of a higher standing. This because no matter what background they come from, if they share the same ideals, the citizens and the leaders, which they most probably do, because these issues are usually very prevalent in authoritarian countries, they will most likely want to change this, and they'll garner support from citizens because even though I don't think the citizens would put the fact that the opposition leader is from like a different background over the fact that they need to solve these issues of human rights and these issues of lack of human rights and lack of freedom of speech. And therefore, we believe that this class barrier will not cause the citizens of these countries and the subjects of these countries to not listen to the opposition or to not care about the opposition, because we believe that no matter what class the opposition leader is from, the promise of these ideals are very enticing, which is why we believe that that just because they come from a different background, just because they don't come from a different standing, this doesn't mean that all the policy they try to introduce or try to push for are ignored by the general population. Before I move on, any POIs?
No, it's 6.
Oh, never mind.
I
Sorry.
have a POI. Oh,
It's protected.
Sorry, it's 6 minutes. Okay, so in summary for my speech, we believe that no matter that firstly, a person with a political background is able to a person with a political background is able to create more change and push for more policies and evade usual tactics used by authoritarian governments in order for them in order to silence them. And this allows for more change to be more positive change to be created. And secondly, that the opposition in both sides of the debate have the same ideals to help the country out of the prevalent issues. And this is why we believe you should vote for proposition. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that fine speech. Now I'd like to invite the leader of opposition.
Hi, give me a few moments. I'll set up my speech. I'll turn on my camera. Yeah.
Sure, ready when you are. Hello, are you there?
Hi, sorry. Yeah, my bad. All right, cool. Can everybody hear me? I'm assuming everybody can hear me. Okay. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, One, we think that the lack of characterization that came from the government side will ultimately lead us to win. But a few case flaws coming from side government, first of all, right? Mainly three things. Firstly, they talk about on how it will ultimately gain more political power and they can lobby change on their side. Sure, it does create change because you do we do understand that these politicians in authoritarian countries do have that political power, but I think you need to prove to us on how change would not happen on our side, or at least is marginal compared to yours. But why do we still say that proof or why change would still happen on our side? Notice that working class opposition working class main leaders of the opposition would obviously know enough to help the country since they face the music of what these powerful authoritarian countries give to them. And even if they didn't have the proper resources, we just say that those resources would probably just come from the government in the first place. But even if, right, we did implement this and there was no short-term change, probably because we assume that they don't have that political knowledge to change anything, we still say that if we were to run this in the long term, more working class people would be able to go into politics because they know that they have the chance to be like a main leader of the opposition through and via natural change, it would be better. Number two, they talk about on how people who share the same values, like these rich people in authoritarian countries and poor people share the same values, but we don't really think this is true. We don't see the line of logic. Please do understand that rich people still have more leverage and they rarely face the large and serious oppression that working class people actually face in powerful authoritarian countries. But we'll be charitable. Even so, notice that the government gave them that leverage in the first place because in an authoritarian country, you most likely do not have any political freedom to begin with. So it's most likely that that leverage to begin with was not under their own ability to garner it, rather it came from the government. I think the definition was made quite clear by the government. So let's just talk about the issues that government will try to solve, or just both sides in general. I think the main problem here is that there is oppressive conditions in authoritarian countries, and that's why comparing both strong politicians in these countries versus the working class, which one will ultimately bring better change towards the people on the ground. And we say that this issue can be better solved under side opposition, where the working class is ultimately focused to be the main leaders of the opposition. Prop then has to prove to us a few things. Firstly, they have to prove to us on how they achieve greater emotional rhetorics from their leader to be able to garner sympathy from the people. Number two, how they ensure that the leader won't turn corrupt. And in their best case, when they get into office, right? Number three, they need to prove it to us on how these politicians who are successful have not been helped by the government, therefore are ultimately not pro-government to begin with. I'll explain this further in my characterization. Three things you have to prove today. Firstly, why having a commoner on the ground, like being a politician, is better than an original politician that came from that country who has some sort of political knowledge, right? Number two, the ability to garner better attention from the support, for support from the people on the ground. And number three, the ability for these people to succeed in the office and are less prone to corruption and more toned to the people on the ground. Let's move into characterization. Let me characterize what we see. What do authoritarian countries then look like? The leaders of the country would have control of the people, and usually in these authoritarian countries, the people on the ground have no say to combat the government. This looks like exploitation of that power that the oppressed people on the ground would have to be forced to deal with. Opposition media is being censored to fuel state propaganda. Social media is being heavily filtered to ensure the good image of the state and crackdown of opposition political parties. This is, we do see that this is symmetrical on both sides, but at the end of the day, I will still prove to you on how the justification on why having these commoners is preferable regardless. Understand that these communists do face a lot of problems via the government of these authoritarian leaders, making them one who has the most internal conflict and hate against the government's establishment. What then do these successful politicians look like in the authoritarian countries? People that were already privileged and inherently benefited from the start. That's why they have some sort of extra leverage now. Where do they get this leverage from the first place? Assuming they were a politician that was already strong in the nation in and of itself, the only way you can get this if they were pro-government in the first place. And if they weren't, there would be a crackdown upon these people, right? And even if they weren't a people from these home nations or this authoritarian country, and political person or like a politician from another country that has a democratic and liberal government, we say that they're still unable to cater towards the working class or being able to overthrow the government in that regime. This is because an authoritarian regime in the status quo is already anti-West, like e.g. China and Russia, and having these politicians from the US come as an opposition leader is basically political suicide. But even if these people were to succeed, these politicians are not able to cater towards the working class by virtue of them being poor with a silver spoon arbitrarily. How do we then frame the working class? Rational people who have faced these problems of being under a lot of pressure from the authoritarian government. It looks like the people who have been exploited for authoritarian benefits and not being able to express these problems under protection of a politician or a person in power. Let's move on to my arguments. Number one, notice on how on their side, it is more prone to corruption because like if these politicians are good, it means they had a good background that was helped by like the government. It ultimately means that they are pro-government. Why this corruption is bad in the first place? Two things. A, you're putting a lot at stake. This looks like the people on the ground clinging to these main leaders of opposition, and in cases where the people on the ground are being oppressed by the authoritarian manifestos and rulers. B, if these people are not able to protect the rights of these people on the ground, they ultimately fail to cater towards the people who are actually suffering the consequences of the government. Two, why then are they more prone to corruption on their side? Three things. A, it relates back to the fact that these people are successful politicians who have experiences with the government or experiences being helped by the authoritarian government to gain that leverage. What this then means is that by virtue of being helped, they have close connections or have to give these leaders some sort of credit for their success. This is inherently bad because these politicians would then have to be more biased and give into the bribes and like suggestions of the governing party of that authoritarian country. Because if they were to oppose that, their political power is basically gone. What then is the comparative on our side? We say that the working class people on the ground do not have any ties to the government and are less prone to corruption because they know what these authoritarian leaders push towards do not necessarily benefit the working class and are just people on the ground in general. What this then means is that they are less prone to corruption and are more in tune with people on the ground. The impacts of this is that the problems of the government are ultimately hurt, like the problems of people on the ground are ultimately heard by the people and change can happen better. I've said enough. Thank you.
Right, thank you for the fine speech. Now I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hi. Okay, gonna start my speech very soon. Okay. With that being said, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think it's quite convenient for side opposition to dismiss our case and strawman our case without engaging it properly. He claims that he's going to be charitable. I see no sense of being charitable when he sets up unrealistic context and refuses to engage with the case that we actually set up for you. Few things I want to clarify before I get to the 3 extensions I want to present to you today. One is that he says it on the outside of the house, it does create a change. I think that this is a strategic mistake because you weaken your case with this concession. I'll also prove to you why you're less likely to get change under their side of the house. They themselves had to prove why they themselves were going to garner change as well, because we heard no analysis to that. But secondly, they say that these are going to be oppressive countries and like they're going to shut down movement. Again, I will prove to you why this is something that is better under our side of the house and why this movement is something that is likely to be more sustainable. Then they say that, oh, you have to justify why leaders won't necessarily become corrupt. I'll engage with this with a few responses. Firstly, is that I think there's a lot of accountability checks in society that exist to overthrow them, such as you having to gain critical mass from your your whole movement, I guess that they can overthrow you the moment in which they throw corruption. But secondly, I'm not sure why leaders under your side of the house won't be corrupt as well when you lead a movement and gain capital in the process. I think that as per you had to justify why this was something that was exclusive to our side of the house. But finally, if politicians were going to be corrupt but the party succeeds, I think that the harm is just symmetrical, because under your side of the house, there was going to be a corrupt leader anyways. This was going to be the authoritarian government. At least there was going to be some form of democracy under our side of the house. And we say that the sovereignty in our the way in which we treat people under our side of the house was going to be better. But finally, I think that he severely mischaracterizes how opposition leaders looks like under our world. He says two things. Firstly, is that I'm not quite sure how opposition leaders get money directly from authoritarian governments, right? What we say is that these opposition leaders could simply be educated enough about politics to lead a movement and not necessarily have a large form of capital, right? Either way, I'm not quite sure as to why authoritarian governments were going to fund opposition leaders anyway, because as per their own analysis, they would want to dismiss opposition leaders and crack them down. This doesn't make sense. But secondly, opposition leaders were going to be foreign leaders. I think there's just such a logical gap in that. Why on earth would anyone give a damn about an oppressive country's domestic affairs? Either way, I don't see how this was something that was necessarily contentious in any of its arguments. The three extensions I'm going to bring to you in my speech will answer a few questions from opposition. A, why there are structural incentives for opposition party members to be inclusive of commoners. B, why this is more sustainable for opposition parties in authoritarian countries. But C, why the counterfactual under opposition's words is just so terrible. First extension, how there are many structural incentives for opposition parties members to be inclusive of the working class of commoners. 3 layers of analysis. 1, Shamso gives you reasons as to how they were more educated and understood how things were. They were more likely to be persuasive when they were literate and educated, and that they knew how they were going to be talking to the general population. 2, we say is that it is within the best interest of opposition parties to garner as much support as possible. They need that critical mass. Therefore, they would do this in ways such as placing commoners in higher positions, holding discussions with them, and speeches maybe discreetly towards people who shared the same views as them, talking to these people individually in order to persuade people to join the movement. Thirdly, when they're viewed as people who are inclusive of working class people, more people were going to join them because they feel that they were going to be represented, and they're more likely to get people into the movement, which is good. What this means is that when more people get into the movement, it's harder for governments to oppress them when they have to address these people. Therefore, we were likely to get a bigger impact through the opposition party itself. The benefit that they claim to have, they cannot claim a benefit of having representation that is something that is exclusive to our side of the house. We prove why it's better under our side of the house. But the second extension is that even if you didn't believe that both sides of the house was going to garner change in authoritarian countries, which was going to be better for the sustainability of the opposition party? 2 layers of analysis. A, note that this is an authoritarian country. A working class commoner can easily be silenced or shot dead. Someone who is educated and had more influence who died was going to have a bigger impact towards the country, and it's not within the interest of governments to kill them off so easily. We say that governments have to be more careful when trying to shut down more educated people, because they know how to be within the limits of the law, and they know how to be more discreet with their activity, but also they probably they have better access to international platforms to voice out issues and deaths that were going to occur within the country itself. But finally, they're more likely to be able to avoid assassination attempts from government because they know where they have to hide. They have connections to bring them from place to place, etc. There was no engagement with what Shamso necessarily told you in the first speech from LO, right? But B, we say that someone who is educated and knows more about politics is likely to have better leadership skill than the average working class commoner, right? We say that if they're educated and have knowledge about politics, either they've studied politics before, or just by virtue of having knowledge about politics and leadership and how the political system functions in their country, they are going to acquire some knowledge about how to lead other people. Therefore, they actually know how to have effective mass collaboration of large groups of people. So what happens when you lack this knowledge? It's harder for people to believe in you, and it's harder for you to organize an opposition party, right? That is exactly what happens under opposition's world, right? At least on the outside of the house, you have one with a functioning structure. Under their side of the house, when you don't have this organizational structure, it's harder for you to get support for your opposition party. We told you so many reasons why you need this critical mass in order to gain change in the first place. But third extension we're going to tell you is that what is the kind of change of methods or awareness that people of the working class were going to use? This is a counterfactual that's going to exist under opposition's world, right? If you bought into our analysis as about how it was harder to lobby systematic change politically under opposition's world, then they had to resort to other methods to garner change or revolt against governments, right? What this necessarily look like is that note that a lot of times in history, most working class or strikes or rebellions or opposition parties have used extremely violent methods such as the suffragette, BLM, anti-extradition bill movement in Hong Kong, which were all led by working class people, etc. Right? This is because working class people are more likely to be emotional. They're more likely to convince people by emotion, whereas under our side of the house, people who know how politics function will be more likely to be rational. And we told you how they were going to be more likely to facilitate change through addressing this in Parliament or by changing governmental structures, right? Preventing all of these violent forms of protest. But finally, why is violence something that is so bad? There are so many harms that can exist under opposition work because of this. 3 reasons why. One is that you give governments a reason to weaponize your violence as a reason to not believe in your movements, right? They now paint you as a barbaric and uncivilized, irrational movement as a result of this. It then becomes harder to convince government to believe in your movement because you killed your reputation in the process of resorting to violence. But secondly, we say that lives are lost and people are hurt. Note that this debate also takes place in authoritarian countries as for how opposition loves to frame this, they're more likely to respond with extremely aggressive ways to oppress violence, such as shooting people down or arresting them inhumanely and beating them up in prison, right? But finally, they're often viewed, but the moment in which you're viewed extremist and you start to lose support, right? When you lose support, you lose participation, and it is harder to credit the opposition movement. You can no longer get that critical mass, which we've preserved under our side of the house. Therefore, we were able to lobby systematic change better. For all these reasons, I think we take a huge advantage in this debate. So proud to propose. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that fine speech. Now I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Okay. Am I audible?
You're loud and clear.
Okay. Give me a minute. I will set up my timer. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in three. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We want a world where we give the working class commoners a chance to run as government. Today's motion is that this House prefer that the main opposition leader in authoritarian countries to be individuals with a strong background in politics and governance as opposed to working class commoners. So before moving on to my argument, I will be stating a rebuttal on side government. He has stated on how instead of their leader being corrupted, our leader is going to be corrupted instead. Well, we are so much different because we aren't like your leader. Because your leader is corrupted due to people's biasness and bribes, and I will be explaining this more in my arguments. So moving on to my argument, which is lesser prone to be corrupted. So what's happening in status quo right now is that politicians in the status quo are already inherently corrupted, and this is due to the people's biasness and bribes that they actually buy because of the inherent greed towards money and fame. No, thank you. So moving on to the solution, we don't opt into currently existing politicians because they are more prone to money and greed by virtue of them being in the industry in the first place. So how are we so much different than the opposition leaders in the authoritarian? So because firstly, working class citizens are less likely to be greedy because firstly, already disadvantaged from the authoritarian government from the start. And this means that they already have more hate against their government. And number two, this is also true because as you can see in the social heresies in the world today, the working class is incredibly affected by the government. And what does this mean? More likely to be a benevolent leader when they step up into the office. So moving on to the impacts, number one, lesser political turmoils in the long run, and less people being bribed by other authoritarian states, and also being a leader that can provide a real democracy towards the people on the ground. So number two, more happiness is ensured then, because we win by bringing a larger net happiness for the people, more content with the political system of the country, which increases the likelihood of people staying, which also then inherently helps the economy and prevents brain drain. So the comparative for on government side is that government will be living in a world where politicians are able to be corrupted because of their personal greed, much like one who are brought into office in the status quo just now to extend on corrupt politicians' agenda, etc., the rich elites in Russia. So on our side, we will be living in a world where the working class commoner is able to bring a better and democratic state which ensures the fulfillment of the role of the government, wherein help the people on the ground. This is true because we already told you, because these people have first-hand experience and will be sticking to their words. So I would also like to touch on how are they able to garner attention before and after being placed into parliamentary. So then I'll be stating my conclusion. So what have I proven at the end of the day? I have proven how we are less likely to be greedy because number one, working class citizens already have much hate against their government, and this will lead to many disadvantages from the authoritarian government from the start. Number two is the working class has been incredibly affected by their government, as proven in the social heresies already, and I am proud to propose. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that fine speech. Now I'd like to invite the government whip.
Hello, am I audible? Hello.
You're loud and clear.
Okay. A reminder: preferred gender pronouns he, him, and if you want to ask POIs, just say verbally. Thank you. Two burdens in this debate that side government has to prove. Firstly, we are going to prove that having a person with a strong opposition leader with a strong political background guarantees more effectiveness in rallying support and fighting against authoritarian countries. Secondly, we are going to prove that representation is symmetrical on both sides, and having a commoner or a working class person represent a political party isn't going to change on both sides, right? I'm going to split this into three clashes. Firstly, why opposition leaders with good backgrounds are inherently more effective. Secondly, representation. Thirdly, which side has better political campaigns. Firstly, why opposition leaders with good backgrounds are more effective. Note that side opposition has been largely unresponsive to this. They have not talked about education. They have not talked about analysis on why having someone with knowledge of politics and stuff like that is going to guarantee a more effective opposition leader and how they are going to rally and gather support, right? They have given to us one thing. They say that they are most likely going to be corrupt opposition leaders because they benefited from an authoritarian country, hence they are rich. I think DPM has already responded to this, but however, I'm going to give more. Firstly, if there are someone who is rich and is someone who largely benefited from the authoritarian country itself, why would they be in the opposition? Why would they be fighting against a corrupt system which they benefit from? Secondly, I think it is a mere assertion to say that every successful person from an authoritarian country is someone who benefited from the government. I think these are two things which side opposition has missed out. Not much to say in this clash because not much engagement. However, second thing which most of their case lies on, representation and why they think is good, right? we have two things. Firstly, government has proven to you why representation is symmetrical on both sides and why having someone from working class family isn't exactly it doesn't prove an exclusive benefit. But let's take a look at what opposition says. They have said that having someone working class family, you are able to represent workers who are most oftentimes marginalized by authoritarian countries, right? Fine, they may be marginalized, but note, analysis given to you by Prime Minister has painted to you a much more different picture of opposition parties. Note, in authoritarian countries, the sort of fights that you are going to be taking are ones against are fights against a fight for human rights, are fights for democracy, and are fights for freedom of speech. Note that these main battlegrounds are something which are irrespective of your representation. Note that your mantra as an opposition party does not rely on class barriers. That is why when you have someone from a strong political background, it doesn't necessarily hinder or affect the party in general from a sentimental point of view. However, we have given to you many reasons as to why, on a practical point of view, on a person's leadership and knowledge of politics, why that is an inherent benefit. Side opposition has said that by more representation, you gain more support, right? This leads to my third clash, which side has better. Actually, before I go there, I'll just take POI first, if there are any POIs. No. Okay, I'll just move on, right? Thirdly, which side has better political campaigns? Note, side opposition has given to us very few things on this. However, they said that representation means you're going to have a larger, support. You're going to have more people supporting you and stuff like that. Note that this is not true. We have given to you reasons as to why leaders from strong opposition backgrounds are effective. However, one thing that has been largely uncontested by DPM is how political campaigns will look like. Not with working class people, right? They're going to be more emotional. Since going by your characterization that they represent working class people, they are most oftentimes expected to carry out the largely emotional case that the political campaign will look like. This looks like having more violent actions, having riots, having very risky protests on the streets. What this does is that this hinders the movement the moment authoritarian governments are able to paint you as something that's bad. And secondly, right, these are authoritarian governments. They are not democratic. They are going to put you down in horrible ways. They are going to show violence. They're going to respond to your violence with violence. They're going to jail your supporters. They're going to beat up your supporters. This does few things. Firstly, it completely destroys your movement. Secondly, it paints you as something that is bad. Note that in authoritarian governments, most of the times a semblance of stability is shown, right? The moment you disturb this, even the commoners or working class people that you try to represent are going to go will go away from your case. Secondly, which is a huge case from both PM and DPM, is the inherent safety of the opposition leaders themselves. No response. We have given you reasons as to why working class leaders are ones which are much more vulnerable, right? They are more susceptible to attacks. They are more susceptible to arrest without good reasons, right? Note that the knowledge of politics which strong opposition leaders have is something that is where they are able to avoid these things. Paired up with things such as more international clout, like the moment Navalny landed in Russia, the entire world looked at him. The entire world monitored where he would be like, right? So we say that the safety of the opposition leader is something that is, of course, important. The moment he dies, you lose your figurehead, and when you lose your figurehead, your entire movement goes down, and you won't have an opposition movement, and that is going to be the reality on side opposition. They have not proven to you as to why it is one symmetrical or better on their side. They have not responded to this point at all, right? So I think the fact that we're able to prove that political campaigns are going to be more effective on our side and with the fact that that representation and the things we fight are going to be the symmetrical, right? I think we take this debate.
Right. Thank you for that fine speech. Now I'd like to invite the opposition whip.
Okay, give me a bit and I'll set up my timer. Thank you. Am I audible and visible?
Yep. I can see you. You're clear. You're loud and clear too.
Thank you. I take POIs verbally and I go by she, her pronouns, but just refer to me as opposition whip. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. We see that assassination and jailing done is symmetrical. We see that crackdowns are symmetrical on both sides of the House by virtue of this debate having in the context of an authoritarian government in the first place. The debate shouldn't be about on which side crackdown is lessened. It's about which side can garner more support from the communities, not only domestically, but also throughout the globe. But just to be charitable, I'll engage on all grounds that were stated in today's debate. I'm pretty sure I have 4 clashes. Yeah, I have 4 clashes in today's debate, right? I'll just go through them one by one, and I'll also engage on every single thing that government team has told you today. On to the first clash. I think this is the most prominent clash in today's debate on which side garners more domestic support. This was a line of contention given by both teams. On proposition, they told us one main thing. They told us that the people on the ground will support them regardless because they have the same ideals by virtue of them just being in opposition in the first place, which we think is completely true, right? This is symmetrical on our side of the house because we are also the opposition leader. But on the premise then, whether or not the people on the ground will have like complete support for these people, we said that on the meta, we got no incentive analysis on the people on the ground from PM from the get-go. We can classify this as a one-liner. But on the analysis then, whether or not people on the ground will support them, I have 3 layers towards this. First of all, who are the people on the ground? We say these are inherently the people in the working class. Second of all, how are they treated in the status quo? We say that they are like actively oppressed by the elites, right? This is like oligarchs and the people in the Kremlin towards the Russian citizens or the coup in Myanmar done by the military. We think that normal people in the working class are the ones that are actively oppressed by the people at the top already, those in the higher echelons of society. What impact does this then bring? Even if then we take you at your best case where you're able to bring larger leverage, they will see you as a higher up when they were subjected to oppression historically, right? This means you do not get the domestic support in either way. This is exemplified to how the people on the ground already hate the elites, like the movement Eat the Rich, or just the social narrative that politicians in and of itself are bad. Onto the second layer on the impacts, right? This is going to be taking them at their best, where we assume that they will get domestic support. We think we have to weigh this on the scale on both vendors' impacts, whether or not theirs will outweigh ours. Assuming their best when they do get some kind of support internally, right? We say you cannot outweigh our benefits. Why is this true? 2 reasons. First of all, for all the reasons that we stated before you all throughout 2 speakers, we told you how by virtue of proximity in the first place, on how our opposition leader and outside the house are related and in touch with the working class, you're more able to relate to them and are more able to like have some sort of rhetoric to relate to them and like get a larger voting bloc. But also secondly, because if you're more able to provide legislations or just campaign in a way that can directly help the people, this is because we are just more able to like campaign in a way that can directly help the people by virtue of proximity, right? This is true and comparatively not able to exist on their side of the house because of how the elites are already inherently patronizing against the poor in and of itself due to them just not living the same experiences as those in the working class. This is, for an example, like the assumption that all African Americans are criminals and whatnot, or just examples like the poor are living in the slums and whatnot. We think all of this are very patronizing because by virtue of you bringing privilege, you're not able to relate to the people on the ground. Therefore, in the comparative then, your side's unable to achieve any of the impacts you try to prove by the principle of proximity of ours outweighing yours. You're not able to relate or have meaningful social interactions with the working class as compared to our side. What did we tell you as opposition? Ethan gave you a whole argument on this, right? How you're able to garner domestic support. What DPM then tell you? They told you that politicians have an incentive to be inclusive just because they need to get critical mass. On the premise then, we say this is not true because if you need to have like political capital, you need to care. Oh wait, hold on. What am I doing? Okay, because of the very reason that you were a politician in the first place, you're more able to lobby for change for ways that are much easier, just like buying your way in or just bribing the politicians at the top. Note panel, this is literally arbitrarily bad because you're privileged and aren't able to was that just have some sort of rhetoric that will appeal to the people on the ground because you're someone that's alienated from the larger working class. We think in this clash we win the debate. On a clash which side got us international support, I think this was a marginal clash then, because we got no analysis from Prop on how they garner international support but we think that international support is important because authoritarian regimes affect the whole principle of humanity in the first place. We think that proposition loses this clash because they had no analysis on this. But just to reinstate our points, opposition, we told you because of how we have emotional rhetoric, you're more able to get support from investors from other nations to back you up just because of you being like someone that's more desperate, and like they're more able to sympathize you because you're someone from a smaller like place of like and from the get-go in the first place. Therefore, we have and win this clash. Third clash then on which side lobbies for change easier. Proposition, they told you one main thing. They told you politicians have more leverage. They're more able to induce societal change because they have like more political capital. Three things then. First of all, sure, you do. We concede to that. But to induce legislations, you need to be in power and in office. Therefore, to fairly debate on this clash, we need to assume both sides are in power already and are already like an opposition leader. We said that by then, because of them being an opposition leader and actively like being someone that's in like the position of power, they already have the symmetrical point of leverage just because by virtue of them being in power already. Therefore, the political capital is something that's symmetrical on both sides. But even if we put them at their best and us and our worst, we're willing to take the trade-off, right? We said that Ethan gave you an analysis on literally, even at our worst, where we do not have any sort of leverage at all, we're still able to spark motivation and like motivation of the lower classes in other nations living in authoritarian regimes. This was never engaged upon from any of the speakers. Last clash then, which side gets more government crackdown? This was something that came up pretty late in the debate on like how violence will happen. We said proposition. They told us one main thing. They told us because how the working class will be violent and extreme, they lose the support because they're like very reliant on emotional rhetoric. I have a few layers towards this. First of all, on the premise that the authoritarian government will crack down on the working class in the first place of like these opposition leaders. We said they have no incentive to because it inherently ruin their international image for a government to just like completely go against their own people. But even if it's true, right, this isn't an exclusive harm because violence has to exist in both worlds because you're being oppressed regardless in both benches. On the impact standard, the violence is bad. We don't see this is structurally true. We said because you're able to get support emotionally through our rhetoric, we get more support. But secondly, it is a principle good, right? Because you are violent, it is an act of desperation against the government in of itself because you were oppressed for decades, right? We don't see why do they not have the right to be like violent. This is a primary good in the first place because it was justified. But then comparatively to your counterfactual, wherein you assume you're not violent, right? We said that you're more easily to get outplayed or just outsmarted by the pre-existing higher ups in like the already existing government because you're more predictable, because you're someone that already follows like the rules of the book. By that virtue, you are more able to like get out strategized by other existing politicians that are against you. On the best case then, where we take them at their best, that violence is bad and we're gonna get cracked down upon. We said that having the literal government of the country cracking down violently on the working class movement is bad for the image, even if we get cracked down and all our movement like is falling and our whole like political party is bad. We say you're still going to get emotional support from other people in the first place because first of all, it's just principally bad in terms of like humanitarianly, you're silencing your own citizens. Therefore, even at our worst, we're able to just leave some sort of impact on the world wherein the authoritarian government will be held accountable. But this is something exclusive on our side of the house. I'm very proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that fine speech. Now I'd like to invite the opposition reply to summarize the opposition case.
Okay, cool. Hi. Can everybody hear me?
You are loud and clear.
Thanks. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think that the whole of side government's case is contingent on the fact that these politicians will not be corrupt. However, in the status quo that we have today, or in this debate in general, we do not see this happening. Let's paint both sides real quick. What does side government ultimately look like in this debate? It looks like these main leaders of the opposition, authoritarian countries, not being able to bring effective change to the people on the ground due to the fact that these people need to give leeway towards political leaders or just authoritarian leaders to begin with. It looks like the people on the ground, or like the people to combat the government by virtue of it being an authoritarian country where people can be shot down and killed without anyone having a say or anyone giving like proper impacts. This is inherently bad because change would ultimately be quite little. Why is this more likely to happen on site government? We think that I think my first speaker has made it quite clear. By the fact that these political powers needed to be leveraged by the government in the first place, it therefore means that they cannot like push against the government. Notice that these people were to fight against the government, they will lose their political power because I think recognize that it is an authoritarian government to begin with. Most of the people do not even have a chance or a say to combat that in the first place. What then is the framing for opposition? We ensure that the voices of the people on the ground are ultimately heard. The fact that there is representation on the ground via the working class person who chose to be the lead in the main opposition of the country proves that change can happen in an authoritarian country, which will lead to a better change at the end of the day. Moving on. Why do we think that side government's case, we are pretty sure that, we're very certain that government's case is contingent on the fact that these politicians will not be corrupt. But do understand that my first speaker has already mentioned that has already contextualized politicians as people who have already had political power that was given by the government. But even so, these politicians, even if they could bring change, these politicians will not ultimately get political support by a lot of people on the ground in the first place. This is because the working class do not feel as they can be properly represented by these rich politicians who have had leverage given by the government. What then do we tackle from government? A few things. Firstly, the support of the people. Notice that there was no analysis coming from government. Most of the people will not support these rich politicians. Therefore, even if you had that large leverage to begin with, nobody will support you, which means that political parties on your side do not bring change. I think my third speaker has made this quite clear. Number two, the fact that these governments are ultimately corrupt at the end of the day. Notice that this is quite clear in this debate today. Governments will not be transparent towards the people because there's little change as the change as a politician on your side is contingent on the fact or is contingent on these authoritarian leaders giving them the ability to do so. Therefore, since they want to be seen as someone who can help the country by the people on the ground, they fight for the opposition wing. But notice that regardless, they still have to bend down towards these authoritarian leaders because they do have the capability to strip away that political power. What then did we achieve? Two things, main things. Firstly, we talk about on how there is better lobby for change on our side. My three speakers have already made this very clear, and they've already told you that in the working class, people will ultimately get a lot more attention and a lot more support behind it because they are the people who have faced that oppression, and they are the people that they are most in tune with to the people on the ground. Notice also we have less corruption, and we say this is good because change on an opposition party is very, very hinged on the fact that you have a very transparent government who will support you and is not secretly supporting and is pro-government at the end of the day. So therefore, yeah, that's how less corruption ultimately leads to better change at the end of the day. I think my side wins quite clear. Thanks.
Right, thank you for that fine reply. Now I'd like to invite the government reply to sum up the government's case and quarterfinals round.
Just give me a second.
Sure, ready when you are.
Okay, if I'm clear and audible, I'm going to start very soon. Okay, that being said, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 1 year ago, I lost in the quarterfinals of MNSDC 2021 to Nazrin. This year, we team up and I'll prove to you why we go to the semifinals together. Both sides of the House agree that garnering change and protecting the opposition party is the goal of this debate. 3 burdens we prove to you as side government. A, why can representation happen better on the outside of the House or happen to? B, why you are more likely to garner change on the outside of the House. But C, in the absence of change, which movement is something that is more sustainable, right? Just for the simple fact that opposition's case has so many logical inconsistency and incorrect characterization in this debate, they already knifed themselves out of this round. Not just that, but it's funny how they dismiss and nitpick arguments without actually taking them down properly. The fact that whip gives you new material, but okay, let's actually be charitable and engage with them. Let's point out the logical inconsistencies and incorrect characterization. But First problem is that they don't necessarily try to engage with Shamsu's characterization with proper structural analysis of how these opposition parties were necessarily going to look like. But even if they tried to engage with it, most of them were pretty much just assertion or just had logical inconsistency. First thing that they tried to point out under this, our side of the house, is that leaders under our side of the house was something that was going to be corrupt. I think we took that down already, just question the logical consistency of that. Why would people in opposition parties co-opt into why would people who had the incentive to be corrupt want to join opposition party when they could co-opt when they could opt into existing corrupt government? But secondly, I'm not sure why they necessarily say that these people who lead opposition party are from foreign countries. I don't think that makes sense. I don't think it's contentious either. We also told you why structural reason as to why opposition parties had to align with working commoners. Therefore, they had to represent commoners in the process. During the process in and of itself, not much engagement with it. Either way, even if you didn't buy into our rebuttal, I'm not quite sure why any of their challenges were necessarily contentious in debate. But what did they try to prove to you? They tried to co-opt the benefit of representation on the outside of the house. Therefore, under their side of the house, people were more likely to be happy. Shamsul gave you structural incentives, which proved to you why the principles of opposition party and communist principles were going to align. Therefore, they were going to push the same things together. I also told you how there was structural incentive in order for like these opposition parties to actually represent these people. DLO did not contest this at all, and she does not prove exclusivity, but moreover does not prove to you with structural analysis as to why this was something that was going to occur. It's just pretty much an assertion, and then she says, oh, they become happy. We told you why people could access representation on the outside of the house and that they could become happy too. This is something that is not exclusive to their side of the house, but we also tell you why it could happen better, because the critical mass was something that was going to be more effective on the outside of the house. Not much response either. I think it's also quite interesting for Whip to say that their side gets international representation. I didn't hear much analysis from her first two speakers, but from how their side of the house, like how on earth was a commoner going to get much international representation anyway in an authoritarian country, right? No analysis. But finally, even in the absence of change, there's no response to whatever we told you as to how violent methods were going to be the method that working class commoners were going to use, right? And up until opposition Whip, right? We gave you structural analysis as to why this was something that was likely to occur, and we told you how this was going to be so damn hurtful to the opposition party. The responses that Whip gives to you are quite questionable, but because this is a reply speech, I can't necessarily tear this down or give new material. But finally, in terms of assassinations and oppression, right, I don't think they actually engaged with the structural reasoning we told you as to how silencing was harder to occur on the outside of the house. I think that like this point still necessarily stands. We could preserve leaders better. When we were able to preserve leaders better, this was better for the long-term sustainability of the party. We tell you how we were going to garner change better on the outside of the house because of the reason of how you were going to get better political lobby, but also because the LO made a concession in the very beginning. They didn't backtrack on this. This weakens their case much more. But finally, we also told you why this was going to be far much better in the absence of change, right? Because that they were no longer going to use violent methods. But we also told you why these leaders were likely to be better than working class commoners. For all these reasons, we go to the semifinals. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the quarterfinal round. Thank you for the debate. You guys can virtually cross the floor and